So Russ, we're going to have, and Fiona help show a history of the network.
Who knows when the first community garden, the first documented community garden started?
1970s?
Yeah. I say documented because occasionally I've run into people who said, oh, and this happened in Sydney with the first community garden, oh, there's a community garden before that. But there might well have been, but it's lost to history because nobody documented it.
And it's not still going now.
And it's not still going. So the first documented one we have was there. So if you guys, upside down, 1977 at Nunawading, which is apparently a suburb of Melbourne. And so Nunawading community gardening is regarded as the first. It's still going. It has moved from where it was quite some time ago, so I understand. But that's where it all sort of started happening. And it's interesting too, who was saying, James, talking about permaculture. 1977 was when the first permaculture book, Permaculture 1, was published. There was no connection.
Interesting.
But it's interesting, and that might say something about the times. Yeah, the 70s. Move on a bit to 79,
Good year,
and we get Collingwood Children's Farm. Has anybody been there?
Yes.
Yeah, if you haven't, it's one of two things you need to do in Melbourne. One's go to Ceres and put at least a whole afternoon to that.
Absolutely.
And the rest of the day, or the next afternoon, put it into Collingwood Children's Farm. It's on a bend in the Yarra. There's a farmer's market there on the weekend. And they've got sort of big farm animals like pigs and a cow. So it's actually more in that UK tradition of a city farm.
Is it only for children?
No. Don't know what. I think it's probably a historical artefact.
They produce children,
It
they?
started as an educational program for kids to learn about farming.
The decade flips and we're in Melbourne still in 82 and we get the start of Ceres. Ceres is in East Brunswick. Ceres is a very big place built on an old landfill. It's council land. It's on Mary Creek. And it's quite an enterprise. It's grown from when I first saw it in 1984 when I went there with a woman from Sydney called Robin Francis, and we went out to have a look at what's happening there. It was sort of two sheds in this sort of weedy field with a chook run and some community gardens. But
Wow.
it's big now. It's big. They employ people. They do labour market programs. Up Mary Creek, they got 2 hectares of commercial market garden which they sell at the Ceres fresh food markets. They run a community supported agriculture called Ceres Good Food, which delivers weekly boxes of food to subscribers on that community supported agriculture model. They do training, their schools program, they've got a childcare centre and a railway carriage on there. There's so much there, you've got to go and see it anyway.
Huge amount of
We come to Sydney and Sydney's first community garden.
garden,
Right.
yay!
Yeah, congratulations.
We're turning 30 in October.
Having a party?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
It's on health department land and it's, I don't know how big it is.
I don't know,
It's
I
big
don't
for
think
Sydney.
smaller
Sydney's
than
gardens are
this.
small. We don't have all this space.
No, way smaller than this.
But it's a good little place just down on an inlet from Sydney Harbour, next to a football field, and it's been used for educational purposes and all sorts of things.
I'd say it's about 2 tennis courts. Would you?
Yeah.
What suburb are you in?
In Lilyfield, Leichhardt's probably better known.
Yeah. It's as I said, it's on health department land, and it's on land which is they recently been looking at reusing. It's an old mental hospital. It's still going. I was on the master planning team for the Cullen Parkland site, so we put in there to retain the community garden, and I think I got it through with that, and give it land to expand if it wants it.
The community was really supportive when we went through that process of consulting. There was a big community consultation about Cullen Park, and which is what, 60 hectares or something?
Yeah, it's huge.
And everyone's been battling to keep it open space. Friends of Cullen Park have done this fabulous job saving it year after year from developers and stuff. And yeah, when we went to those community meetings and we said, look, we'd like to expand a little bit, and everybody else from outside the garden said, no, why don't you expand over here? There's plenty of room. You expand more. And we're going, oh, okay then. So yeah, there was a lot of community support. It hasn't happened yet, but there was community support.
So that was the start of it. The next garden was actually at in 1991 in if anybody knows Newtown, urban Newtown. It's just, yeah, okay. It's a bit like Brunswick Street in Melbourne, if anybody's been there. But there's education department land and Angel Street, well, they call themselves Angel Street Permaculture Forest or something now. It used to be
Permaculture food forest.
Yeah, okay. They approached the school. What had happened, they'd been looking for a start a Sydney Farm, and there's been 4 attempts at that. And so they, the South Sydney Council, which has long ago disappeared, said no. So a couple walking home one day saw this land, and they said, hey, we could start something small here, like a community garden. Who owns the land? They looked it up, Education Department, trotted up to see the head teacher of the high school there, and they said, can we access this disused block of land which is down below you? And the head teacher said, what land? They didn't know they actually owned it. So anyway, they went there, and it's still there. It's in Inner Urban Newtown.
Where did Angel Street go?
Oh, I haven't got an Angel Street. 1991. So it's a big skip across the water now, across the desert, to 95, to Perth City Farm. Perth is one of these things, it's a bit like a replication of Ceres on a smaller scale. It's one of these grand things. This is the grand period of city farm creation.
But originally this was a Men of the Trees program and a youth program. They were looking for a disused site, so they found an old industrial site.
And once again, if you go to Perth, go there. It's not far from the city. Lots to see. I've got a farmers market on a Saturday, I think.
It still comes under the Men of the Trees.
Yes.
Tom Scott is president of the Men of the Trees, and they've put
That's right,
and
you're right.
City
You
Farms under Men of the Trees.
97.
And the interesting thing about it was a contaminated industrial
Yeah.
site, and they've converted into something productive. They are separately incorporated, but it still comes under Men of the Trees.
Oh, okay.
Something different happened in 1998 in Melbourne. Cultivating community started.
We're too early.
We're doing that.
Cultivating community isn't actually a community garden or a city farm, it's a community association, an organisation. And they contracted to the Department of Human Services and the state government to provide community garden, community food systems services to social housing tenants. And that's their main focus. They also have a schools program. In fact, they trialled a schools program in the inner city with a well-known schools, a woman who's well known for a school sort of program, a cook, a chef. And anyway, so what they do, they're a service provider to state government, and they look after something like 24 or so community gardens. They started a community kitchen on the Fitzroy housing estate, which you can see. It's a big brick structure where all these Turkish women apparently turn up each week and loaded up with about 30 loaves of bread or whatever it is to make. So it's a community kitchen, which is part of the food security sort of program. They've been very much, as I said, involved in developing school programs. They employ people, full and part-time, mostly people who can go out and teach horticulture to people who knew nothing about it, including those who speak, multiple languages, different languages. So it can be quite a challenging job. But that's an interesting sort of model. 2005, in South Australia, Claire Fulton, or Claire Nettle, she is now. You guys must know her.
Yep.
She was doing her PhD and was very much involved in the community garden network plan and helping set up community gardens, but mostly providing really invaluable research. And her PhD is actually published as a book, a hardcover book. But she was involved in producing a community garden resource kit, and later on publishing with, is it a neighbourhoods housing association or something like that? One of those agencies producing a start-up kit which you can download from the community.
Yeah, it was actually launched here at Fern Avenue with the Minister.
Oh, okay.
About 206.
And that's the 2010, that's in gardening, the growing community startup kit. So that's one of those valuable documents. Now, what happened in 2010 in Tassie?
Oh, was that the year that we had the conference?
Yes.
State conference?
conference.
Yep. At Devonport.
In Devonport.
Devonport Community
And
Garden.
that was the year that we had the Eat Well, Grow Well program. And so that was a state government funded, it was a nationally funded project in Tasmania, just looking at community gardens, and I was with Eat Well Tasmania, and so part of that project was to collate what was happening around community gardens, and then we had a gathering in Devonport.
In 2010, an eventful year, there's a community garden conference in Canberra called by the agency which runs, it's a community association which sort of runs and assists community gardens. They have about 12, called COGS, what is it? Canberra Organic Growing Society, yeah. And they worked with the University of Canberra on a research project. So they had a conference down there at the university in 2010. And I think Costa might have mentioned that when he said something about Canberra before.
Costa was there, I was there.
Yeah, and it was a really good sort of conference. Yeah, people presented research papers and stuff, and generally met up and had a talk. And Christine Milne from the Greens Party was there and offered advice on how to influence politicians and all that sort of stuff. So it was quite helpful.
So that was mapping, just briefly, how community gardens evolved, and all you guys are going to fill in the gaps that you know of in a minute. But Russell's now going to go through how the network itself, the Australian City Farms and Community Gardens Network, got going.